Hey everybody, this is Alex. Thanks for downloading. I'm going to walk you guys through the basics of brush creation. So let's get started. Let's grab a new document. I usually grab the 8.5 by 11 default, but it really doesn't matter as long as your pixel count is high enough. We'll get into that later, but if you just want to follow along, start with 8.5 by 11. Grab a new layer and grab your lasso tool, and you're going to see me starting to sketch out basically an abstract shape. I'm not trying to make it look like anything. I just want it to have an interesting shape to it. I will be multi-purposing this brush, meaning it won't be just used, say, as a brush, but we can use our brush for parts, say for character parts, vehicle parts, costume design, architecture, you name it. You can use your brushes to be much more than brushes, so I'll be going over all that. So I'm still here just trying to find interesting shapes. I'm using the polygon lasso tool to get very clean, straight lines. And then I'm just going in freehand and carving out new interesting shapes here. I'm still on the polygon tool. Cutting shapes out, adding more in just by using Shift and Option on the keyboard, Alt if you're on a PC. And you can see I'm trying to get more organic shapes in there. So I'm trying to get a nice contrast of shapes and line within one brush. And it's still very abstract even up to this point, and it really shouldn't resemble anything. You don't want your brushes to resemble the thing that you're painting. So you do want to keep them abstract. I found it in my early years of creating brushes, I tried to make them look too much like the thing I was painting. Say if it was a vehicle or a person or say a weapon, I would design them to look like these things, and it really does not work. You can take my word for it, or you can try it yourself and experience the pain that I went through. Bottom line is, don't make your brushes look like the thing that you want to paint. They want to be, abstract for them to work properly. So I'm spending, just a decent amount of time on this. Again, I'm not making this brush to be a specific thing. It's completely abstract. So if you're seeing things in there like, say, a weapon or a building, that's great, because we can always use our brushes to recreate assets like that. But for me, this is just exploratory. It's also a way of loosening up. It's also a way of just doing something when you're not even sure what it is that you want to do. A lot of artists get held up in not being very decisive. I know I have that problem. We all do. So this is just a way to loosen up. Just get a new document, get your lasso, and just start scribbling things down. Create things that look cool or interesting to you. So this is as much of a personal process as it is, an artistic one. So definitely, just turn on the music and just kind of zone out. If you meditate, this is definitely a good way to meditate. Again, you're not really thinking about anything. You're kind of connecting lines. You're getting rid of shapes. So eventually you do want to start putting thought into what you're doing. So at this point, I'm pretty much done with the selection. Now I'm going to get my paint bucket tool, set it to black, and I'm going to fill in that selection. Now I can see this as a silhouette. this definitely lends itself to the kind of work that I create, lots of sharp edges and alien-esque things. If this is not the work that you're into, that's fine. I'm just showing you guys the technique. If you like more rounded edges, more softer edges, then by all means do add those to your work. So here I'm just naming the brush out and actually saving it out again, because my initial graphic was very large, 8.5 by 11. It's 2500 pixels by 3300. That's pretty big. So I saved it out to create the actual brush. I did this because I don't want my brush to be as big as 3300 pixels. That's too big. But I can repurpose that graphic later on, and I'll show you guys that. So now I did a save as, and lowered the pixel count, so I'm about 1200 pixels max on height, I think, and I'm getting a new layer and I'm fading the edges now. So this is your second process that you want to do in brush creation. Select your graphic with the lasso tool and then grab a new layer and then start fading the edges. Now this is going to add depth to your brush. You can see here I'm clicking on and off, seeing what my brush looks like without all this fade. Now I'm erasing out. I don't want to completely obliterate all that work I've done. But again, this is going to add the depth that you do want in your brush. You don't want it to be just this flat silhouette. It has to have some fade on it, which I'll show you guys in a second why it's important to go through this step. And these things will show up, even the very lighter gray areas, they are going to show up. So next you want to do is you want to flatten the image and then go to edit and then define brush preset. I usually always hit OK to the name it gives me. And basically our brush is defined now. At this point I undo that flatten because I want to keep my layers in case I want to go back and adjust that fade or adjust the graphic itself. So now we're going to test this brush out. Grab a new document. If you have a default, that's fine. I just pick US paper and then I can, as usual, crop in. That's usually what I do. It's kind of a habit thing, but we all have our own habits. You can get your own document size. Okay, so when you go into your brush palette, when you click on brush presets at the top, your brush is going to be there at that bottom of that, either that list or that list of icons. You can have your brushes show up as the names or icons. So this is the brush right out of the box, and this brush is included with this download. And you can see here that if I start painting with it just straight up with no letting up on the pen, I have no pressure sensitivity. I have no the fade really didn't do anything. So in order to really get that fade to work, I want to click on other dynamics. That's going to be in your brushes palette as well. They're all there in a list there. So other dynamics is at the bottom of the first half of that little list. That's going to allow me to really have that fade show through, and of course it lets me use my pen on my tablet for pressure sensitivity. So you can see that other dynamics, you want both of those drop downs to say pen pressure, and I'll go over this again as well. Shape dynamics, this is where you can tell your brush to go along the tilt of the pen, like what I'm doing here. I'm actually tilting the pen, physically tilting it on my tablet from one direction to another, and that's how this brush is actually turning according to that tilt. So I usually like to experiment around with as many settings as possible and try to get this brush to do as many different things. Now I'm changing it from pen tilt to, you can see there's a big list of things. I'm going to go to pen pressure. This is basically telling the brush if you press hard, it's going to say go this way. If you press lightly, it's going to go the opposite way. This is the most chaotic that this brush can, the most chaotic mode that this brush can be in. meaning that you're not really sure how the brush is going to come out. See that it's spinning around and twisting and turning and doing all these things. This is great for creating your own textures. You make your own brush. You set it to go crazy, as I did here in Shape Dynamics, and you can see how they overlap each other, and you get all that fade, that depth. And now by making the brush small, I can use it like as a sketch pen. It's still on crazy mode, as it were, but when you make it that small, it becomes like a very nice little pen texture brush that you can do a line drawing with it. You can see I'm getting very thin with the brush. So all from one graphic, I can basically create everything I'm creating here, and it looks like it's a lot more than one graphic, than one brush. So this is all about being as efficient as possible in your process, doing one thing and having that one thing last for quite a while. So here I'm just scribbling. Again, this is the testing phase. I want this brush to be good as a sketch pen. I want it to be good as say a texture pen. And when you like your brush, you want to save it out. Click that little icon at the bottom of your brush palette, and you see it's showing up at the bottom of your brush presets. There's the brush you imported. There is the brush with the all the saved, in this case, Shape Dynamics and Color Dynamics. So now I'm experimenting again with the brush, going back to the idea of multi-purposing the brush. So I've changed the little angle direction on it in my brush tip shape category, and essentially it has become a completely different brush. You can see here that I'm turning the little wheel around, I'm changing the spacing, changing the size. I'm trying to look for as different as a brush as possible. So going back to the idea of being efficient with your brush, economical really. So again, just resizing it, changing the angle, spacing. It's usually those three at this point. And again, by changing that spacing, it had become a different brush again from one graphic. So usually when you see something in your chaotic painting, in this case I see what reminded me of an eye, so I just kind of go for it. So that's what's going to be we'll be doing in the next painting, is kind of creating all this madness and then finding something within the madness and then kind of just going for it. So painting an eye is a separate thing. I'm not going to get so much into the rendering aspect of painting. That'll be for another download. But this is just for creating the brush, testing the brush out, and actually painting with the brush. Okay, so let's continue to test this brush out and create some new interesting things with it. So this is probably one of the most fun parts of brush creation, is just kind of getting in there and letting loose with this thing you created, letting the wild animal out, as it were. I'm going to throw down a gradient here using the gradient tool, and Photoshop comes with standard gradients. You can make your own. I'll do that in another download for, say, environments and all that. But we're just sticking to the brushes here. I just want this gradient to resemble some kind of environment, meaning that It's darker at the top, lighter at the bottom, but nothing specific at all. Just to give a place for the brush to live, as it were. Sometimes painting just on a white background can be a little annoying after a while. So to be able to just jump in using color is one of the great advantages of Photoshop. So here I'm further tweaking the brush. I'm sliding the angle jitter slider, roundness jitter, flipping the XY jitter, all the jitters you can imagine. Again, what this does is create a very chaotic brush. There's no control over it, which is, to me, the most exciting part of brush creation, because it's going to create things for you. It's going to create ideas. It's going to create textures in not that much work, meaning you just create the one brush and kind of go nuts with it, and getting into the whole repurposing aspect. You can create textures out of these brushes, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. It's just creating just some texture ideas and really seeing what this brush is able to do in this mode, in what I call the chaotic mode. Sometimes you'll be painting and you'll get frustrated because usually we want to use this technique to inspire us to go on to the next level. Sometimes you'll create a brush that is a cool looking brush by itself, but it's not going to always do the magic that you think it's going to do. That's up to your imagination. It can definitely help. Sometimes it will create, say, a figure or a vehicle or a piece of environment, and then you just kind of riff off of that. Sometimes changing the color is good. So now I'm just changing between the three brushes, really. It's the one brush, but going to the thinner brush that's set to direction, and then going to the larger one that's set to go completely nuts. Again, this is all coming from one graphic. Okay, now that I have this texture-ish image here, I'm going to duplicate it and then change my brush mode to color dodge to try to add some more contrast, some more drama. Basically, when you paint with color dodge, you paint with light. So I'm using that same brush and I'm going in and just really trying to make some areas kind of pop out a little bit more. This is going to add contrast to the image. I'm switching the brush back to normal. I just wanted to get a few hints of that light in there, and then now I can just color pick from those new introductions of basically variations of color that I had already put in. I started out with some basic color that's all based off of that gradient that I brought in. Then I brought in some of that yellow, and now I'm going in with the sketch version of that brush, and I'm just going to basically paint in a figure at this point. Usually I do that when I don't find the thing I'm looking for. What I did here was flip the image upside down. It's very important to just see your image from as many different points of view as possible. The easiest way to do that is to flip it horizontal and flip it vertical. You can notice a lot of mistakes that way. The old masters back in the day used to hold their paintings up to mirrors to look for mistakes and check for composition and all these things. So it's a very classical technique. but we can do it very easily with just a couple of keys. I set flip horizontal, flip vertical to Command F and Shift Command F, F being for flip, and I can do that in the Edit drop-down menu and scroll all the way to the bottom to keyboard shortcuts. So back to the brushes. So you can see I'm just painting with that actual brush now. I haven't changed up brushes yet, so I can sketch in a line drawing. Here I'm sketching in a face and an upper body. Usually that's my default thing to do, is to sketch in a figure if I can't really find anything else, or if I'm not sure what I want to paint. A figure is obviously the most relatable aspect to any painting, being that we are figures, we are humans, we can relate to other humans in a painting, as well as obviously other creatures and animals. But now I've switched to an airbrush, just a basic airbrush, nothing fancy on it, and I just want to soften some of these areas. I'm just picking from the color within the painting. I haven't really introduced hardly any new colors. And with the airbrush, you can use that as a sketch pen as well. When you make that airbrush really small, it becomes like a nice little detail brush. So this is from many years, and even my current figure drawing participation, really just trying to attend as many sessions as possible, and then to draw the figure as much as possible from my own imagination, because I feel that that is the most important thing an artist can learn, is the figure. It doesn't matter what you want to do. If you want to be a concept artist or an illustrator or a character designer, even environment design, figure drawing, believe it or not, will help you with environment design, and I'll definitely go over that in my environment downloads. So I'm not drawing from any photo here, it's just remembering what I know of the figure and kind of just painting it in. So you can see that there's already a nice contrast now between the chaotic texture that brush made and then just the very soft airbrush. You don't want your paintings to be all hard edged. You don't want them to be all soft edged. You need that nice balance, and I really believe you need both in a painting. Your painting shouldn't be incredibly crisp through the whole thing. You do want to soften edges, and again, that'll be something I really get into with the character design download that I'm doing. So definitely watch out for that. I definitely repeat a lot of things just to kind of get them ingrained to your heads. Just because you hear something once does not mean you're gonna remember it. So obviously you want to save out your work. It sucks when your computer crashes in the middle of a good piece, or even at the start of one that has potential. So just make sure to save often. Always either have Photoshop on autosave if you can. I don't even know if it does it actually. That's kind of an annoying feature, but if you like that, do it. If not, just always hit save from your keyboard. So I'm continuing to sketch in the form. Again, those custom brushes got me up to a certain point, and then now I'm going in and kind of manually doing things. So I go back and forth between the custom brush and say an airbrush or just uh, a basic brush with maybe a tapered edge to do a little bit more detail work. So now I'm grabbing some red. I feel it stands out. I already have a lot of bluish and pinkish tones, so this deep saturated red is really gonna complement some of those, and it's gonna stick out a little bit. So these brushes are great for that. It's really that repetitive pattern that we see a lot in we do see it in nature. If you look at a millipede, centipede, whether or not you think they're hideous or frightening, they are definitely beautiful, but they do possess that repetitive quality that we can easily achieve in these brushes. So whenever I do a lot of my alien designs that you guys see on my DeviantArt site, a lot of them are used in this same technique where you basically create an interesting shape and then set it to direction and then have it kind of just follow your character around, or follow the forms rather on your character. So here I'm just really getting in with the basic brush, putting in a few little details. Ultimately, you do want something relatable in your painting. If it's all chaos, then it's just an abstract painting. It's just something that you can put in an elevator or something, and you don't want that. Once you put that figure or face in there, it goes from the abstract, and there's nothing wrong with abstract. I love it. I love starting out with it, but ultimately I need to get in some kind of relatable element in the painting. And for me, that's a figure. For you, it could be an environment. It could be a vehicle. It could be an animal, creature, alien. Okay, so let's do it again. Let's make a new brush. So file, new. In this case, I'm picking the US paper, but I'm going to change the pixel count to 1,000 by 1,000. That's a decent size. This brush is going to be less complicated than the first one anyways, so it's okay that it's lower pixel count. And I just want to create a simple graphic now. So we started with the complicated one, just to get you guys immersed into the insanity of brush creation. And then now I'm just going to create a simple one and then go back to the painting and add some more detail. But I just wanted to show you guys that, again, you don't want your graphic to be whatever it is that you're painting. But in this case, this brush is going to help me to add in a lot of detail that would take a really long time to do by hand. So now I want this to be a lot more softer. The first one was chaotic, so this one is going to be more whimsical. Has some sharp edges on it, but it has a lot of curves. And always just cutting away and adding with Shift and Option, Alt, and then filling in that selection with black. I deselect it, grab a new layer, grab a big old airbrush and fade the edges with white. So it's always going to be the same process when you're designing the brush. So in that sense, creating a brush is pretty easy. So just a 3-step process. Here I'm cropping in to the brush as close as I can. This is going to save file space, save space on your hard drive. Also, when you capture the brush, it's not going to capture a lot of that empty space, essentially making the brush bigger than it really is. So, make sure to crop into your brushes. And we want to flatten the image, of course, and then define the brush preset. So very easy to remember that process. Now I'm back to the painting, and I'm going to bring up this new brush and see what it can do. So again, here's the brush right out of the box. You might find some cool elements in your brush without it being modified, but you definitely want to throw on other dynamics right away. And again, both little drop downs being set to pen pressure. We can put shape dynamics on, and in this case set it to direction. So now the brush is going to follow the direction of your hand, basically. So now I can get some interesting textures along any of the forms I have here. So I'm dealing a lot with the hair with this brush, picking the colors that are there, introducing some new ones, and really just again going through that same process of tweaking that brush, the spacing, the angle, shape dynamics, squeeze, all that stuff. So I'm getting those nice repetitive patterns again. And going back to the angle and really trying to see what's going to be the coolest angle for this brush. But I continually go back, even after I make them, I continually go back and adjust the angle. And again, you're essentially creating a new brush every time you do that. So now I'm doing more of a, say of a painting approach. When you make the brush small, you're doing, say, more detailed or rendering work. It's not really about that brush looking like it was when you made it, because the brush is so small and you're covering it up so fast that it just, it looks like a regular brush with a little bit of texture on it. So when you make your brush bigger, you really start to notice that spacing and all that design work that you put into the brush. So adding some blues to complement that orange. And this particular brush kind of has almost a chain look to it, and that's something I totally didn't expect. It has a braid chain element to it. It can be used as a chain in a very graphic sense, and a braid as well for hair. So this brush is included in this download as well. So check out how I made it. Make some of your own from it. You can take this one and modify it and do other things that I probably wouldn't do with it, by adding, say, scattering or texture. But ultimately, these are texture brushes in and of themselves. When we start to add even more texture to it, you could lose the brush a little bit, and that's totally fine. Maybe you want to do that. So in the next download that I do from this, I'll get into the more of the way more complex aspects of brush creation using dual brushes and textures and all that good stuff. So saving that brush out, don't forget to save it out, because if you're doing all these great modifications to it, and if you forget to save and you switch to another brush and you want to come back to what you just did, it will not be there. So make sure to save that brush. Click the little save brush icon in the bottom of your brush palette. It's that same little icon that's for new layer on your layers palette. It's a little square within a square. And now going back to just refining this figure, having that brush do a lot of work for me so that I can go back and actually take care of the more important things, like getting this face to look right. If you're going to be painting a face, you better put most of your time into that face, because you can have the coolest colors and the coolest composition, and if that face is messed up, then it all kind of goes to hell. I've experienced that many times. So make sure to hit up a lot of life drawing. If you can't, draw from books, draw from magazines. It's a repetitive thing that you need to do. You need to do it every day, because that's what the other artist is doing. When you're not painting, that artist is painting. When you're sleeping, that artist is painting. So that'll be a completely different download that I do. The business of art. I've given a few lectures at schools talking about, okay, you have the skills, now what can you do with them? Where are you going to get your jobs from? Who do you go talk to? Where do you show your work? So that is a very in-depth lesson in and of itself. So, but first things first, get good. It sounds simple, but it's the truth. Get good at your figure drawing. Get good at mastering Photoshop. Get good at making these custom brushes and having them work for you. I'm continuing to add just a lot more detail, really just kind of refining this face and painting with that basic brush. Now when I pull out, it's just completely chaotic. It's just a big mess. So ultimately you just want to start to make sense of things. Okay, I'm going to show you guys right now how to make a brush from basically a photograph. In this case, it's just going to be a piece of the photograph. So this is a Lamborghini Revington, something like that. And I'm just looking at all these really cool shapes that are on the car, and that's kind of what I want to use in inspiring a new brush. Again, we're not going to make a brush out of the car. We're just going to, in this case, select out that really cool shape right there on the side, and ultimately you want to make it look like not like the thing that you in this case took it from. Again, being inspired by just these basic simple planes that we're seeing here, where these planes are turning, and again the brush really is not going to resemble a part of a Lamborghini at all when you see it in action. It's just again, for the plane changes, the interesting plane changes, the basically the lights and darks, the contrast of the shapes. So here I'm just I'm going to rotate it, and again I'm going to be using it as this repetitive kind of brush. So I'm just going to again crop in and go into hue saturation by hitting Command U or Control U, and then taking out saturation completely. Now I'm going to levels, and I want to add as much contrast to this image as possible. Punch up the lights and the darks so that we get a nice contrast going. I'm just going to take out that little line right there, so I can just color pick on this image here and just take out that little crease that I didn't want there. So, at this point you can, color pick and kind of modify what you have. You can go into warp through your free transform and, essentially sculpt a new brush out of this piece. You see, I've made a spiky one. You can make a flat edge one. So it's limitless what you can do at this point. All these variations. And of course, we're going to repeat that process. We're going to obviously crop in to save space. And we're going to get a new layer. Get that big airbrush. And fade the edges with white. So this is what you want to do with all of your brushes from this point on. Okay, so the brush has been captured. It's been defined as a brush preset as we did in the previous two brushes, and we're going to repeat the same steps. Put on other dynamics and shape dynamics. Shape dynamics set to direction. Change the spacing a little bit and test the brush out. So you can see that it's a repetitive looking brush. It's just repeating the shapes over and over again in the direction that your hand is going. And it really doesn't necessarily resemble, say, a part on a Lamborghini anymore. It's kind of taken on its own thing. It looks more like a industrial metal bird feathers or something like that. So this is a good way to create bird wings. You gotta maybe play a little bit with the pen tilt and all that. But I've done many a bird wing using this technique. They could tend to look a little bit robotic, but that's why you go ahead and you paint over these brush strokes, because these do have an element of a perfect repetitive element. So either you add the texture and then ultimately you always want to paint over. So you lay down this custom brush, and then you go in with just a regular brush into just finer detail and add that hand painted quality so that it actually does look like a painting. So this has really helped me with the hair. And usually, you don't really see hair like this, but there's something about this that kind of works with it. You will see it with certain say goth hairstyles or even hippie hairstyles where things are kind of braided in to the hair so that it has that repetitive feel to it. So some of these things can be actualized in reality. Computer effects, yeah, no problem. It's easy to incorporate these things, but so I'm just continuing now with the hair. I still have that brush, and again, it's not even about it being a piece of a car anymore. It's just it became a graphic that was very simple, and it looked pretty nice just being repeated. So just sketching out the rest of the figure and basically having a lot of that background brush work kind of show through as a texture, giving her that little halo, almost like it's a religious painting, as it were, post-apocalyptic religious painting. It goes on and on. So really it's just about putting the final detail and making sure the rendering is proper, meaning that you have a light source, a main light source, and that you're rendering all of your forms according to that. When I do the character design download, I'll really get into the rendering of a character and form and reflected light and all that good stuff. But here it's just about going into those brushes, and now I've gone back to that kind of braid brush. So now these are the only three custom brushes I'll be using on this painting. Switching back between those three brushes and essentially making the painting look like it was done with a whole lot more than three brushes. Of course I do use the airbrush and just the basic detail pen brush, but that's it. So ultimately 5 brushes on this painting. Here I'm up in the res on the painting so it doesn't get too pixelated. Keeping the face, roughly soft so that I can have a lot of the harder edge crisp areas around the face. Okay, so now I'm going back to the main brush that I'd created, and now I just want to create a part out of that brush. So this is what I meant about repurposing your assets, our brush being the asset. And now I just wanted to create a brush out of the side of this, so I'm just lassoing it. I can just do a basic copy paste, hit file new, do the clipboard, and that'll make it the exact size of whatever it is I copied. Then I paste it into the new image, and the same process again. I'm creating an entirely new brush, so getting a big airbrush, setting it to white, and fading the edges. So again, you put in the work to create one nice detailed brush that potentially has the possibility of becoming several more brushes just in this state, just in the recreating of new brushes in actual new files. That doesn't even include adjusting the shape dynamics and the spacing and the angle and all that stuff. So again, from one brush you can have 20, 30 different looks for that brush. So it's pretty amazing, all thanks to good old Photoshop. So I'm just changing this brush, making it go a little chaotic. Not really sure what it's going to be used for, but I like to experiment, as much as possible before I get back to the actual painting of the brush. So I'm picking a few different colors, just kind of throwing them down. The brush is spitting out, however it's set to, so there's no real control. I can't do a nice controlled line with it. So kind of just using it like as a stamp, almost, as it were. It's a stamp that has depth inside of it because of, first of all, because of the fade that we put in, and then because of the other dynamics. So now I can just color pick. I feel I have enough colors here to work from. Now I'm changing the brush back to direction. Again, repurposing the brush. Changing the spacing, changing the angle. So these are the things that you want to try to do every time with your new brush, is to just see how many different looks you can get out of the brush. And you're going to be surprised that you're going to get a lot more than you thought. Granted that these brushes are, they do have, as I mentioned before, a synthetic look to them. Things that are in perfect repetition like this, can lend themselves to organic qualities, absolutely. But they are also very robotic. They're not organic. They just repeat, repeat, repeat the same way. So that's why you want to go in and hand paint over with just a regular brush and just put in that hand touch. Everyone knows that pieces like this are created digitally. It's no big secret. But when you use the computer to its full capacities, and then you use your own traditional, hand touch qualities, it's really going to be something that's very unique to you as an artist. So here I'm just painting in hair. I'm doing the whole angular hair thing, kind of mixing styles. Her face is painterly, as it were, and the hair is that very sharp-edged graphic hair. She's got this halo behind her, modern day like Joan of Arc kind of thing going on. Who knows? But that's something I like to do a lot as well, is just mixing different styles together and then trying to unify them as much as possible. Here I'm just adding a little bit of texture to the face with that brush. You can see it's very subtle. It's really subtle. But I can add this texture, and it is as subtle as it is. It's unifying the whole painting, because I have all this repetitive stuff going on, this chaotic stuff going on around the painting. If I can just add a little bit of that in there to her face, a little bit, it definitely does help in unifying, because if you don't do that, you're going to have all these separate elements on your page, and it's going to look like a collage. And there's nothing wrong with a good collage, but if you're trying to do digital painting, as far as illustration and concept art goes, you definitely want to unify your image as much as possible. So I'm on that same brush that I recreated from the original asset, and I'm kind of using it now as a line tool, line drawing tool, even though it's still set to chaotic mode. So it's really, there are no rights and wrongs in this technique. There are rights and wrongs in good painting techniques. You don't want to mix certain things together. You want your values to be correct. You want your forms to read as three-dimensional forms. There is definitely correct ways of doing that, but with this custom brush thing, you want to let chaos rule as much as possible, and then using your artistic knowledge, unifying the great mess that you've put down. So this is basically it for this tutorial. I can just continue to put in lines and things and all that, but I believe I definitely got the main points across to you guys on how to create your brushes, how to set them up, and then kind of either using them to create a chaotic texture pattern for you, or to actually use them to actually paint with, to render your forms with. Hopefully you guys have some kind of knowledge on how to, just basic painting techniques. But fear not, I will be putting out basically a whole line of these, so that they are all consistent. I'm going to be covering a lot of topics that I used in my professional career and where I teach as well. So here's the final image for this download. Definitely not a finished piece, but I wanted to show you guys how far you can take a piece using, in this case, just 3 custom brushes and a couple of basic Photoshop brushes, and to really give something a lot of life and a lot of energy without, as you saw, without putting so much hand detail, meaning you let the computer do a lot for you. In this case, we let Photoshop do a lot for us with its custom brush setup and our techniques applied to it. So hopefully you guys got something out of it. Feel free to email me anytime if you have any questions, and more of these downloads will be coming to you shortly, so keep a lookout for them. Thanks so much. Take care.